Okay, think back with me a little bit, a little time travel. Do you remember Y2K? Okay, do you remember where you were New Year's Eve, Y2K? Okay, Y2K, what was supposed to happen, right? Planes are supposed to fall out of the sky. I would not have wanted to be on a plane New Year's Eve, 1999 going into 2000, you never know, right? Y2K, I was a senior in high school because I'm much younger than you. I guess I just turned 18 2 months prior, so Y2K, I was a senior in high school, 1999. I think the expectation was all the computers are not going to know what to do. When they hit the date, 1999, and roll over to zero, they're going to go back to the year 0 AD when Jesus was born or something like that, I guess. So, and that was going to mess with banks, and that was going to mess with flights, and I don't know what was going to happen, but it was nuclear missiles were going to go off, and it was going to be the end of the world, Y2K, right? We survived it. We made it through Y2K. It's been 21 years. I remember New Year's Eve, Y2K. I wasn't allowed to go out because we didn't know what was going to happen, so I spent a really exciting evening with my brother and my dad. My dad's probably watching this. We just stayed home Y2K night. And my dad at that point had a pond in his backyard with fish and turtles. And I knew that if things really popped off, we were going to be eating turtle soup during the apocalypse, and I would have armor made out of turtle shells. It really was a dream come true as a Ninja Turtles fan that I really thought we might do this. I'm going to learn how to use a bow staff and some nunchucks, and we're going to take over New York City and eat all the pizza. So we got through Y2K, right? I remember at that point, I was kind of a new Christian, young, teenager, and I remember a lot of my Christian friends and their families had been stockpiling things for months. They had 55-gallon drums of gasoline and all sorts of food stockpiled, and they were just saving up because this was Mad Max time. It was going to be apocalyptic, end of the world, and when all was said and done, they just had a lot of leftover food and gas and drums that I don't know what you would do with. Do you guys remember May 21st, 2011? That was 10 years ago. A guy named Harold Camping predicted Jesus' return and the rapture. It was supposed to happen May 21st, 2011. I can't believe that was 10 years ago. They had billboards all over the place. His ministry spent all their money trying to, they were trying to warn people about it. So if you can throw this picture up, Shay. On that day, I decorated our front porch with this. I laid an outfit out like I had been raptured just so that I could mess with the neighbors, because I thought if they saw that, the pastor's been raptured, oh no, what are we going to do? I was inside just giggling to myself the whole time. So I have my outfit laid out like I've been raptured. There's a Bible next to me, and then the pizza menu delivery man put a pizza menu next to me. So I don't know what he thought when he came up on the porch. I really wanted to climb on the roof and blow a trumpet just to add a little extra, pizzazz to it, but I don't know how to play trumpet, and I can't climb the roof. But we made it through May 21st also. It's been 10 years since that. So Y2K, May 21st, the college that I and my wife went to, and John and Judy McManus went to, and Jerabel James went to, is called Nyack College, and it was built in the late 1800s and the early 1900s, and they were so focused on the return of Jesus, they said, surely it's soon, so let's not spend a bunch of money on these buildings. They're not going to be here in 100 years, so let's use the cheapest materials, let's cut some corners. Well, it's been 120 some years, and the buildings are still there, but they are in repair, and they actually had to sell a lot of those buildings. But, it has been a hard thing for Christians to know what to do and how to prepare for the return of Jesus. Y2K was confusing, and I think Y2K kind of like revealed a lot of the deficits in people's faith. And then May 21st, 2011, also, I think many in the church understood that Jesus said, no one knows the day or the hour, and making predictions is not worthwhile because everyone that's ever done that has failed, and actually the predictions harm the cause of the gospel. They don't help it. And most in the church knew that, but that situation also did kind of reveal some fault lines and some issues in the church. And it's been a hard thing for Christians to know how to prepare for something that the New Testament calls the day of the Lord. So this morning I want to talk to you about the day of the Lord. This is still part of our Jesus in the Bible series. This is part of the Jesus explained in the epistles. There are really almost half a dozen places in the epistles that talk about the day of the Lord. So we're going to focus on a passage in 1 Thessalonians 5, but I'm going to touch on many passages today. But 1 Thessalonians 5 is going to drive us this morning. So the day of the Lord is something that is referenced both in the Old and New Testaments. Jesus, Paul, Peter, and John all hit, as well as the writer of Hebrews, all hit on this idea of the day of the Lord in the New Testament. And what's incredible is those 4 or 5 different sources, Jesus didn't write anything, but he did say it, Matthew recorded it. Those 4 or 5 different voices, it's incredible how they all pretty much say basically the same stuff. I mean, they come at it maybe from different directions, but you're going to see, I hope today, that there's really a lot of agreement on what the day of the Lord is and what it's going to be like and how we're to live in response to the day of the Lord. So let me read 1 Thessalonians 5, 1 through 11. It's going to be on the screen for you, and then we're going to answer 3 questions about the day of the Lord. Starting in 1 Thessalonians 5:1. Now, as to the times and the epochs, brethren, you have no need of anything to be written to you. For you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night. While they are saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape. But you, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day would overtake you like a thief. For you are all sons of light and sons of day. We are not of night nor of darkness. So then, let us not sleep as others do, but let us be alert and sober. For those who sleep do their sleeping at night, and those who get drunk at night. But since we are of the day, let us be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith and love, and as a helmet the hope of salvation. For God has not destined us for wrath, but for obtaining salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, so that whether we are awake or asleep, we will live together with him. Therefore, encourage one another and build up one another, just as you are also doing. Now, I'm not going to make a major point of this, but I just want to observe in verse 1, now as to the times and epochs, brethren, you have no need of anything to be written to you. That's Paul's way of saying, hey, about the timing of this, we're not talking about that. Of the times and the epochs, you have no need to know that. Jesus said nobody knows the day or the hour. He said to the disciples, don't concern yourself with times and epochs, and then Paul repeats that. It seems like for some reason the main thing people want to figure out about the day of the Lord is when, instead of how we are to live as we wait for it. You know, that guy I mentioned, Harold Camping, the May 21st, 2011 guy, that was his 3rd or 4th attempt at predicting the day of the Lord. It really was a black eye on the church. And it really was the end of his ministry. He had a stroke less than a month after that, and that was really the end of his ministry. But before he died, he did say this, and I'll give him credit for this. He said, I was wrong. It was a sin for me to do that, because Jesus said no one would know the day or the hour. And I have now given myself to studying so that I can be faithful until that day. So I'm grateful that he came to that conclusion. He was 92 years old and had missed 4 times by the time he came to that conclusion. It would be wise for us to not have to go through what he went through, right? And to learn from his experience and from his mistakes that of the times and the epochs, you have no need of anything to be written to you. Jesus' main concern is not that we get the date right. It's that we get our lives right. It's that we live in faithfulness as we anticipate that day. So here are the 3 questions that I want to answer today. What is the day of the Lord? How will the day of the Lord come? And how should we live in light of this? So in verse 2, it introduces this phrase, at least in this passage. It says, you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night. So this phrase, day of the Lord, is a full Bible phrase, okay? The first time that the day of the Lord is mentioned, and we'll just review this story, is when the Israelites come out of Egypt and have to cross the Red Sea in Exodus. So I'm sure you're familiar with this story. The Israelites, the Jewish people, they've been slaves for hundreds of years, multiple generations. Finally, God says, I've heard your prayers and I'm going to get you out of there. He sends Moses as their deliverer. Moses confronts the Pharaoh. He says, let my people go. The Pharaoh says, I don't think so. Remember 10 plagues. The final plague culminates, the plague of the firstborn, where the angel of death strikes the firstborn of every Egyptian dead. And that is when the Israelites are set free. They leave, and as they're leaving and traveling, the Pharaoh has a change of heart, and he says, we're not about to give up all this slave labor. Go get them. Chase them down and bring them back. So Moses is leading probably 2 million, that's the best estimates, 2 million Israelites through the desert. They see behind them Pharaoh's army. They see in front of them a body of water called the Red Sea. They're trapped. Everyone starts freaking out and complaining to Moses. You guys know the story if you've watched Prince of Egypt or read the Bible. God gives Moses a rod or a staff, a big stick, and he strikes the Red Sea. It parts. They cross the Red Sea. And while they cross the Red Sea, Pharaoh's army chases them into the Red Sea. And as soon as the Israelites get to the other side, the sea closes on the Egyptians and drowns the whole army, right? They called that the day of the Lord. That was the first reference in the Bible to the day of the Lord. The prophets, especially the minor prophets, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, loved to talk about the day of the Lord. Joel in particular in his writings refers to this locust plague that is going to sweep through and it's going to destroy all the crops. And when this type of locust is done, a second type of locust will come, and then a third, and then a fourth. And then after the four types of locusts, there will be a fire that will burn up everything that's left. And it'll be a time of judgment on those that have been abusive. And Joel calls that the day of the Lord. Does that make sense? The cross, the crucifixion of Jesus, is a day of the Lord. Not every day is the day of the Lord, but there are these specific events that happen in biblical history that are called the day of the Lord. The cross was called a day of the Lord. It was a day of judgment, but it was also a day that purchased our freedom. So let me define day of the Lord, just now that I've given you a couple biblical examples. The day of the Lord, this is a definition by Dr. Tim Mackey. It'll be up on the screen as well. The day of the Lord is when and how God intervenes in human history in order to confront corruption and bring deliverance. Okay? So let's apply that definition of these stories. How about when the Israelites left Egypt? That was the day of the Lord. Was God confronting corruption? Yes. Was he also bringing deliverance? Yes. How about the crucifixion of Jesus? Was God confronting corruption in that? Sin? Yes. Was he also bringing deliverance through Jesus' death? Yes. Now here's one that's a little interesting. Joel, the day of the Lord in Joel, the people that are getting judged are God's people. The Jewish people, the Israelites, they're the ones that are being disciplined because in that situation, they were the oppressors. They were the sinful ones. So here's the thing about the day of the Lord. It's a two-edged sword. It comes to judge sin, but also to set free. And what that is will depend which team you're on. If you're on the side of sin, if you're on the side of abuse, if you're on the side of oppressor, it's going to be a day of condemnation for you. But if you're on the side of righteousness, if you're on the side of holiness and faithfulness, it's going to be a day of liberation for you. It's when God chooses to step into time, into human history and say, enough is enough. We're going to set things right. Now I realize I'm on thin ice here, but I feel like maybe in a small way, the last year and a half, that whole pandemic was a little bit of a day of the Lord, where God exposed some things, shook some things up. I'm going to talk about this more next week. But perhaps something like that was a day of the Lord where things were exposed, where some things were dealt with, other things were healed. The day of the Lord is both a day of deliverance and a day of judgment, and what that is will depend on what side you're on. Okay, so that's what the day of the Lord is. The New Testament speaks of a final, ultimate day of the Lord, and that is what we are talking about when we talk about Jesus' return. When you read the book of Revelation and get into all that like weird imagery, and we're going to spend, starting next week, we're going to spend the next 3 weeks on the book of Revelation. The return of Jesus is the ultimate, capital D, day of the Lord. It's the final day of the Lord. It's the day where he's really going to expose all of the sin, judge all of the sin, but also set free all of the captives, heal all of the broken. Does that make sense? So all the other days of the Lord are like little down payments on that ultimate day of the Lord. That's what Paul's talking about here in 1 Thessalonians. This ultimate day of the Lord that we're waiting for, that's going to be culminated with the return of Jesus and a millennial reign, which I'll get into in about a month. But this day of the Lord is what they're looking forward to. That's what the day of the Lord. So if you're like me, you might say, well, what's that going to be like, this day of the Lord? I mean, you know, what's the weather forecast, and how should I prepare, and how's the day of the Lord gonna look? Well, the New Testament is incredibly consistent in how it describes the coming of the day of the Lord. Let's pick up in verse 2. He says, "For you yourselves know full well that the day of the Lord will come just like a thief in the night. While they are saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly like labor pains upon a woman with child, and they will not escape." So in this passage, Paul compares the day of the Lord to two things: a thief and a childbirth. He says it's going to come like a thief in the thief in the night, but also like birth pains. So let's talk about this thief in the night. This is how Paul describes it in 1 Thessalonians 5. This is how Peter describes it in 2 Peter chapter 3. This is also how Matthew records the words of Jesus. Jesus says it's going to come like a thief in the night. I got to get this right. I'll have it done by the end of the 11 o'clock service. Thief in the night in Matthew chapter 24. The idea that he's trying to communicate is, to those who are unawake, it's going to be sudden. To those who are slumbering, to those who are sleeping, this is going to come out of nowhere. Now, he does go on, and I don't want to jump ahead of myself, but he does actually say in verse 4, "But you, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day would overtake you like a thief." The thief is only going to surprise the sleepy. Does that make sense? And I am getting ahead of myself. But Paul's saying, hey, just don't be the sleepy. Don't be spiritually sleepy. Don't be the slumberers, so that the thief doesn't overtake you, okay? But the idea behind the thief in the night image is that it's going to seemingly come out of nowhere. It's going to catch people off guard. It's going to be a surprise, but it should not catch the church off guard. It should not catch those that are spiritually perceptive off guard, which is why he goes into the second image of the birth pains. Before I get to the birth pains, let's talk about this phrase, peace and safety. In your Bibles, it might be in quotes. It's on quotes up here. Okay, let me talk about that. Shay, can you throw up that keep calm and carry on slide? Okay, you guys familiar with this? It's kind of made a resurgence. This is a poster. Originally, this was a poster that was used in England prior to and during World War II. This was kind of we would use the word propaganda, but they would just call it marketing. This was something that was in stores and businesses in England right before World War II, when they knew World War II was coming and people were anticipating getting their houses bombed, and they did. The British government said, you know what? Let's try to keep people calm. Let's try to stop chaos. We'll put these posters up all over. So this was actually provided by the British government before and during World War II, so that chaos would not break out in the streets, and to prepare people for this. That's why, British people are all buttoned up and, proper and whatnot, and eating crumpets and things like that. Well, the phrase was, keep calm and carry on. It was a government-sanctioned propaganda phrase Well, the Roman government had their own government-sanctioned propaganda phrase. They printed it on money. They printed it on banners. And that phrase was peace and safety. So go back to the passage, Shay. So Paul writes, while they are saying peace and safety, while they are saying keep calm and carry on, that's when the thief is going to come. When everyone's trying to say, calm down, calm down, calm down, that's when this is going to take place. Does that make sense? Peace and safety was the propaganda phrase that they lived under in the first century in the Roman Empire. It's printed on their money. You might have heard of something called the Pax Romana, which is Roman peace. If you just do a little history research, the Roman peace, the Pax Romana, peace and safety printed on their money in Latin is securitas, which is security. These were their values. This is what they were all about. And Paul's saying, when they're telling you that, be prepared. Does that make sense? Now, that leads to this birth pains picture that Paul and Jesus all address. It says in verse 3, while they're saying peace and safety, then destruction will come upon them suddenly, like labor pains upon a woman with child, but they will not escape. So this is not the first time that the followers of Jesus in the first century would have heard this labor pains idea, because this is specifically what Jesus himself compared it to in Matthew chapter 24. He said, there are going to be labor pains that precede the day of the Lord. And I talked about this maybe 2 weeks ago, because I think, to me, the labor pains metaphor is the main lens that I look through to try to understand what is going on. I shared about, when my wife had our first son, Aiden, or our first child, as a first-time dad, kind of nervous, like she woke up on the morning he was born and she was just like, ooh, I think that was a contraction. And I thought, oh man, I'm about to deliver this baby at home. I didn't know that we would be slowly waiting for the contractions to pick up for 12 hours at home. We went to the doctor that morning. They said, yeah, I thought we were going to have a baby before lunch. The doctor said, no, go back home. You're not even close. Call me when the contractions are 5 minutes apart. And I was like, 5 minutes? Because again, to me, one contraction is all it takes. I have no concept or paradigm for the intensity that I'm about to watch, for the screaming, the violence, the profanity. Just kidding. All the nurses were like, when Kendra was giving birth, Kendra, it's okay if you swear. And she was like, nope, not going to do it. I was such a bad coach. So when Aiden was born, the nurse that delivered Aiden happened to be our next door neighbor who lived right across the street. I can see almost her house, if these glass windows weren't stained. So we knew her. And so in between the contractions, when I get nervous, I make jokes and I'm like, so, well, what's up? How you doing? And Kendra's over there. My only job was to keep a wet wash, like a cold compress. It was a washcloth on Kendra's forehead so that she would be comfortable. So I have this compress up on her head, but I'm also joking with the nurse because I'm nervous. And I look up and mid-contraction, Kendra's pushing. The towel has fallen all the way down over her face. She's basically being waterboarded while trying to give birth to a child. And I was just like, there's no way I'm going to be able to raise a kid. I can hardly help my pregnant wife. But little did I know that the contractions were only going to get more intense. I thought every contraction was the one. But they only got more and more intense. And that's the way we want to look at the return of the Lord. Like, we experience contractions from time to time. Maybe World War I was a contraction. Maybe World War II was a contraction. Maybe the coronavirus pandemic was a contraction. And we all think this is the one. But I think what Jesus would say is it's only going to get more intense. They're going to get closer together and more intense. Does that make sense? And also, they're going to be worldwide. I know we as Americans kind of think that like we are the world. And if something happens in America, it affects the whole world. But in reality, a rough year for America. Now, this last thing was the whole world. World War II was the whole world. World War I was the whole world. Spanish flu was the whole world. But a rough year in America, we can't interpret this stuff based through these American-centered lenses. We need to be looking at what are the global trends. What's happening outside of America? What's happening in other places? Because they've had rough years too, these other countries. So when things start to happen that are worldwide, and when they start to become more frequent, and when they start to become more intense, that's the birth pains picking up. Does that make sense? Okay. So what are the birth pains? Well, Matthew 24, as well as other epistles in the New Testament, give us some of the birth pains. In there's going to be a slide that has the birth pains. Can you throw the birth pains slide up? Okay. Because this is all over the New Testament. I couldn't pull up every passage. There are the references for you if you want to check this. The first, one of the 6 that are identified in the New Testament is a great falling away. This is in 2 Thessalonians, 1 Timothy, Matthew 24, that there's going to be a great falling away. What that means is many who claim to follow Jesus will not be in for the ride of the birth pains, and they will just back off. We call this the great apostasy, apostatizing. It's those who we think they're walking with Jesus. They give the appearance of being followers of Jesus, but things are going to get tough, and they're not going to want to go through that, or they're going to be deceived, and they're going to walk away from Jesus. So there's going to be a great falling away. This is predicted by Peter, Paul, and ultimately Jesus. There's going to be a great falling away. Secondly, there's going to be a man of lawlessness. 2 Thessalonians 2 as well as Matthew 24. There's going to be this leader called the man of lawlessness who is going to just bring chaos, although my hunch is the chaos will have the look of order, but he'll bring chaos. This man of lawlessness is a world leader, okay? Not, your block captain. Not even the mayor, not even the governor. This is someone this is happening globally, understand? Okay, so this man of lawlessness is going to just start to bring chaos on the world. The chaos will probably not look on the surface like chaos, but it will result in chaos. The man of lawlessness. Thirdly, false religion will continue to be developed. And the false religion is identified through things like false doctrines, false teachers, false prophets. There will be a rise in false doctrines, false teachers, and false prophets. And in that rise, false religion will be developed. That seems to be happening, although false religion goes back to the book of Genesis. I mean, that is not a new thing, but I think there'll be an increase in it. I'm going to make one more point about that in a moment. There's going to be social and political conflict. Jesus said this, you'll hear of wars and rumors of wars, and nation will rage against nation. Okay? Social and political conflict. There'll be wars. Countries will be fighting one another over land, water, airspace, whatever. There'll be wars. There will also be rumors of wars. Nation will rage against nation. That word nation in Matthew 24 is actually ethnos or ethnicity. So I wouldn't even read that as this country versus that country. I would read that as this ethnicity versus that ethnicity. This race versus that race. Racial conflict, racial tension will precede the day of the Lord, and it will only increase. There'll be natural disasters, it says in Matthew 24. There'll be earthquakes and famines and floods. Those will be increasing. Seems like we're getting set up for that. I have no problem personally accepting that climate change is a reality because Jesus literally said natural disasters will increase. So, seems to connect. Finally, he said persecution, Matthew 24:9. That people are going to begin to really have a distaste for Christians. Because Jesus said, I am the way, the truth, and the life. No one comes to the Father except by me. That's a pretty exclusive claim. Paul said, here's a sinful lifestyle, here's a righteous lifestyle. That's a pretty exclusive claim. And probably, this is a little, projection here, but in the name of tolerance, people will be very intolerant. And people will begin to persecute those that follow Jesus and refer to them as narrow-minded and persecute them because they're so open-minded. There's going to also be, this is not one of the birth pains, this is also one of the things that precedes the day of the Lord, a culture that is developed. And this is in 2 Timothy chapter 3. This will be up on the screen as well. 2 Timothy chapter 3 talks about a culture that develops. It says this, but realize this, that in the last days, difficult times will come, for men will be lovers of self, lovers of money, boastful, arrogant, revelers, disobedient to parents, ungrateful, unholy, unloving, irreconcilable, malicious gossips, without self-control, brutal, haters of good, treacherous, reckless, conceited, lovers of pleasure rather than lovers of God, holding to a form of godliness, although they have denied its power. Avoid such men as these. For among them are those who enter into households and captivate weak women weighed down with sins, led on by various impulses, always learning and never able to come to the knowledge of the truth. That's the culture that's going to be established. Selfishness, hatred of the previous generations, reveling, which is just kind of like laziness and wasting time, disobedient to their parents, ungrateful and entitled, unloving, irreconcilable, gossiping. Let me just add, fueled by the media, fueled by the internet, fueled by social media, right? Treacherous, reckless, lovers of pleasure and leisure rather than lovers of God, holding to a form of godliness, although they've denied its power, empty religion. Avoid all of that. It says that among these, they will enter the households and captivate weak women weighed down with sins, led on by various impulses. Now, when Timothy wrote that, he wrote that because in that church, there were men who would go find widows, unmarried women, and they would go take advantage of them, manipulate them, go into their house and mislead them. Sometimes it led to sexual immorality. Other times it just led to taking advantage of them and getting their money. That's what Timothy was talking about originally. But listen, this happens already. You have a port in your wall that lets the world come into your house through the computer, through the internet. And there are people going in and taking advantage of vulnerable people who don't know what to think, who don't have anyone to bounce ideas off. Often they are people that live in isolation. This has already been made available through YouTube, Facebook, the internet. People are taking advantage of people who could use someone to bounce some ideas off, or could use some community to help them process these ideas. So this is already happening. It's probably only increasing. And they are focusing on people who are vulnerable and susceptible. So that's the type of culture that's going to be established. So how will the day of the Lord come? Like a thief in the night, like birth pains, and also this type of culture will be established. So what are we supposed to do about this? For many people, the answer becomes isolation. Jesus actually said people will run to the mountains. They'll want to isolate. Oh, it's getting crazy out here. I'm going to isolate. I'm going to hunker down. I'm going to build some thing under the ground where I can hide. I'm going to stockpile. I'm going to hide. That has been the impulse of many Christians. But let's read what Paul says. Here's the response. He says in verse 4, 1 Thessalonians 5, "But you, brethren, are not in darkness, that the day would overtake you like a thief. For you are all sons of light and sons of day. We are not of night nor of darkness. So then let us not sleep as others do, but let us be alert and sober." Those are the two words, alert and sober. Not fearful, not hiding, not confused, not isolating, but alert and sober. For those who sleep, do their sleeping at night. For those who get drunk at night. But since we are of the day, Let us be sober, having put on the breastplate of faith and love, and as a helmet, the hope of salvation. For God has not destined us for wrath, but for obtaining salvation through our Lord Jesus Christ, who died for us, so that whether we are awake or asleep, we will live together with him. Therefore, encourage one another and build up one another, just as you also are doing. He says for them to be alert and sober, and he ends it with, encourage one another. You know, I don't know when the day of the Lord is going to be. I have a prediction. No, just kidding. I don't know when it's going to be, but here's what I know. We're going to have to encourage each other as that gets closer, not fight over stuff. I think probably a lot of like the divisions that exist in churches, whether it be denominationally or politically or based on preference, that's just going to have to all go away, because we're going to need one another. We're not going to have time to fight over which Bible translation you like better. You have a Bible? Then be my friend. That's what it's going to be like. He says to be alert. Live like it's daytime. This is not the time for us to go into dullness, passivity. I know it does kind of feel like, okay, things are getting back to normal. Don't let that lull you into sleep. Spiritual sleep I'm talking about. You can sleep at night, that's fine. But I'm talking spiritual sleepiness, slumber. Don't let the return to normal, the ease, don't let that take you into spiritual dullness. I know many of you told me that at the height of the pandemic, you felt like you were experiencing God's presence. You were paying attention. You were awake. Stay awake then. Stay awake. Be alert. Be sober, which is to be clear in your thinking. So you guys probably have never touched alcohol, so I'll explain it to you. When you drink, it impairs your thinking. It's an outside influence. It lowers your inhibitions to where probably you'll do things that you wouldn't do otherwise. Okay, there are thoughts that can have that type of impact on you. When you buy into this agenda or buy into that narrative, it has an effect on your thinking that alcohol has on your body. All of a sudden, you're not thinking clearly. All of a sudden, you're off balance. All of a sudden, your inhibitions are lowered, and maybe you'll do something that you wouldn't otherwise do. There are worldviews, there are thoughts, there are practices that can make you mentally drunk. And he's saying, be sober, get clean, clear up. I don't know what's best after a hangover, what to be drinking. You guys, I'm really talking about alcohol a lot today. I don't know what you're supposed to do after a hangover. I heard eat some bread or something like that. Listen, after a period of spiritual drunkenness where you are unclear and unclean, this is your best way to sober up, like a cup of coffee. Get a biblical worldview. That is the best way to start thinking clear. Get a biblical worldview. Immerse yourself in this book. All right. Let me try to wrap up here. Jesus taught about his return or the day of the Lord in parables. Matthew 24 and 25, a lot of stuff in there. The parables always really illustrated the same two ideas. It was either be prepared, because it could come anytime, or be patient, because this could take a while. It was be prepared or be patient, not be predicting. Be prepared or be patient. How do you be prepared but also patient? How do you figure out some sort of sustained preparedness? Well, that's what I want to wrap up with. As we approach the day of the Lord, I think the face of the church is going to change in one generation. I'm not the first person to say that. I'm borrowing that from someone else. But as we get near to the day of the Lord, and I don't know when that's going to be. I don't know if we'll be around for that, or that could be 100, 200, 1,000 years. I don't know. I'm not trying to tell you when it's going to be. But during that time, the face of the church is going to change rapidly. It's going to go from church has been done one way to now church is done another way, and it's going to change in a generation. There will be people that will say, I remember when we used to do it that way, and now we do it this way, because they had a foot in both worlds. That's what it means by what I mean by one generation. I remember the old way, and now I know the one way. Prior to the day of the Lord, the face of the church will change in one generation. How are we supposed to prepare? I think that living in community is going to be really important during that time. So as I mentioned, a lot of people, the impulse is to isolate. I can't trust anyone. Become self-reliant. Listen, that is a pipe dream. You're not going to be self-reliant. You might be able to do some stuff. You might be able to take care of people. This is my plan, to stockpile friendships, to stockpile relationships. Listen, I know I'm going off the deep end here, and humor me a little bit. If there comes a point where Christians are not able to participate in the economy through something like a mark of the beast, which prevents people from buying and selling, if there comes that point where we're not able to participate in the economy, I'm so glad that I know a Christian mechanic who's going to need Christian customers so we can have our own little micro economy. I'm so glad that I know Christian doctors. I'm so glad that I know Christians that have gardens. I'm so glad that I know Christians that can hunt. I'm so glad I know Christian school teachers, because I can't do all of that on my own. Does that make sense? I'm not stockpiling food or weapons. I'm stockpiling relationships. I'm stockpiling friendships, because we're going to need one another during that time. Does that make sense? So that's my suggestion. Go deep with people. Develop a spiritual community, because that's what we're going to need to get through that time. Community is going to be really important to us during that time. Community is what's going to protect us from deception. A lot of times people make bad decisions, bad choices, because it seems to them like it's the only choice. That's why some people get into sex work. That's why some people get into addiction. That's why some people get into crime, because they think, I have no other options. I want to make sure that those whose faith is struggling during this time know that they have options. You don't have to walk away. You don't have to be deceived. You don't have to take a mark. You don't have to do that, because listen, you have people around you. We're going to protect you from deception. We're going to talk you through some ideas. Make sure that you don't go nuts. We're going to help you put food on your table. We're going to help you make ends meet, and you're going to help us, and we're going to help one another. Does that make sense? The living in community will protect people from deception. It'll provide practical help. It'll also provide spiritual encouragement. Now, I mentioned earlier that the author of Hebrews addresses the day of the Lord, but as far as I know, just one time. Hebrews 10, verses 24 through 25, and I did not add this until this morning, so the sermon was not intended to point this direction, but this is kind of where it ended up. Hebrews 10, 24 through 25 says this: "Let us consider how to stimulate one another to love and good deeds, not forsaking our own assembling together, as is the habit of some, but encouraging one another all the more as you see the day drawing near." So this is what the author of Hebrews says. The more you see the day getting near, the more you're going to need to assemble. Does that make sense? Because it's going to encourage one another. Don't scatter off and break off and hide and isolate. But all the more, as you see the day of the Lord approaching, don't give up assembling. Don't give up living in community. Don't give up living with other Christians. Don't give up having these relationships. Does that make sense? Now, if I was a more insecure and aggressive pastor, I would say get to church. But I'm not saying that. But I am. But I'm not. But I am. Okay? If I was a manipulative pastor, I would absolutely do that, but I'm trying not to be that way. This is the real thing that I'm saying. We can't isolate. We have to have relationships. We have to have spiritual friendships. That's one of the ways that we're supposed to prepare for the day of the Lord and live in anticipation of the day of the Lord. Okay, so here's what I want to say before I pray and let you go. This concept of the day of the Lord, it's a big old concept in the Bible. And there are over half a dozen passages in the New Testament alone that address it. So what I did, and you probably got one of these on your way in, was put together a very simple, brief handout that has a reading list on the 6 passages that touch on the day of the Lord. I'm not talking about a verse. I'm talking about a chunk, multiple verses. If you got this, so 6 passages from Matthew, 2 Peter, 1 Thessalonians, 2 Thessalonians, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, that I'm just suggesting you find a time, doesn't have to be this week, could be this week, that you read these. One chunk a day. I mean, you could do all of this in half an hour. You really could. But do one a day and just like highlight and underline the critical points in there. And then there are some themes to look for that I give you hints on at the bottom. This is available, well, we only have it on paper. We'll put it in the Church Center app and on Facebook this week so that you can get an electronic copy. But if you would like to understand the day of the Lord better, check out these passages. What you will not find on this list, you will not find the rapture much. You will not find the return of Jesus. We will get to those in a few weeks. This is the day of the Lord, okay? Does that make sense? So if you read this, you're like, oh, there's a lot missing from this. We'll get there. We're going to get there, but it's not on this one, all right? Okay. Let me pray for us, and then I'm going to let you go, but I just want to encourage you, make sure that you are stockpiling relationships and friendships as we, look forward to that day. Jesus, when I think of the day of the Lord, when I think of your day, I know that you're going to bring judgment on sin, but you're also going to bring reward for righteousness. And I know that if we are on the side of Jesus, your side, it will be nothing but reward. Lord, we don't want to live, we don't need to live in fear of the day of the Lord. We live in anticipation. We live as that being our hope. That is what we look forward to, because on that day, you are ultimately going to bring heaven to earth. That's what we've been praying for 2,000 years, Jesus. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. We look forward to that day. Not in fear, not in anxiety, but with hope. That's the day you will make all things right. That's the day you will show everything as it truly is. Prepare us for that day. Prepare us to live in sustained preparedness. That we should be patient and also prepared. I pray that, Jesus, in your name. Amen.